All right, good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Secrets of the World's Best Thought Leaders. This is a webinar hosted by Rattleback. I am Jason Malicki. I'm the principal of Rattleback. Rattleback specializes in marketing for professional services firms. We try to do somewhere in the vicinity of 2 or 3 webinars a year, sometimes with partners or sponsored, or sometimes on our own. So um, glad you're able to join us. This webinar, I'm actually going to share the findings of our latest thought leadership research and talk about what we found to be the habits, mindsets, behaviors of the most successful thought leadership oriented organizations. So it's really more of the title's a little misleading, a little bit of optics there from a marketing perspective, but it's really more about the organizations that are most effective at developing high quality thought leadership. All right, so here's the agenda for today. We'll walk through the research and methodology. I'll explain the research we did, when we did it, how we did it. We'll talk about mindsets and behaviors. We'll talk about publishing and promotion, and then we're just going to give some thoughts on who's the best, or I should say, the thoughts of our survey respondents on who's the best. So let's jump in. All right, so how do we do this research anyway? So, what research did we do and why and how? What's going on here? So we have done, we have been researching thought leadership now for, I believe this is probably our 5th time doing this. In this particular study, we surveyed 233 professional services firms, which for us, you can see the breakdown here. It's mostly consulting and IT services firms, technology and SaaS companies, architecture engineering firms, and then a mix of financial services, venture capital, and private equity firms. We surveyed across the organization, so we didn't designate ourselves just to like editorial folks or marketing folks. In fact, as you can see, we got more respondents from the CEO and kind of like leadership lines than not, which I think is really good. And obviously, when you look at the revenue breakdown and the size breakdown of these firms, we have a wide range of sizes of firms. For the most part, we don't have any firms in the like sub, $1 to $2 million range. So we don't. I'd have to double check the data set, but we don't have very many firms that are like solopreneurs. I don't think there's really any of those in there. And but a wide distribution. So obviously having a kind of a collection of marketers and leaders and sales folks and editorial folks is important, because in smaller firms frequently they don't have a dedicated editorial team, a dedicated internal research unit, right? So we wanted that distribution. So a wide range of distributions. And then how did we come up with the best? So I think the working title of this session was, Secrets of the World's Best Thought Leaders. And so I want to just outline how we came up with the best. And what we used was what we call the 8 dimensions of thought leadership effectiveness. And this is actually a model that I co-created with Bob Bidet of Bidet Thought Leadership Partners over our years of research. I mentioned to you before that this is probably the 5th study we've done. Bob and I did 3. We co-collaborated on 3 through our venture Profiting from Thought Leadership in 2018, 2020, I believe, and 2022. So we did 3 studies together. And prior to that, Bob and I collaborated with the Association of Management Consulting Firms on 2 or 3 similar studies to that. So we've been studying thought leadership now for at least a decade or more, through surveys like these, surveys with consumers of thought leadership, people that use thought leadership to make business decisions, and also qualitative research, and then also the Profiting from Thought Leadership conference we ran for 5 years. Definitely, we brought in sort of the best of the best and learned from them in a very direct way. So something Bob and I created was what we call 8 dimensions of thought leadership effectiveness. And in this particular survey, what we did is we asked all the respondents to self-identify how effective their firm is along these 8 dimensions on a scale of 1 to 5. So 1 would be we're incredibly not effective, and 5 would be we're extremely effective. And those 8 areas of effectiveness are, first is determining which issues to focus on. The second is creating content from original primary research. So having the ability to develop high quality original primary research and turn it into high quality content. The third is the ability to take the wisdom and expertise of a firm's subject matter experts and turn it into high quality content. The fourth is just marketing prowess, the ability to take thought leadership and use it to generate interest and leads for the firm. So build demand, basically, at its core. The fifth is sales prowess, so using thought leadership to sell our products and services. So working with business developers or managing partners or seller doers or whatever the structure of the firm is to take the thinking into the marketplace and use it to move the needle on client relationships. The sixth is service enhancement, which is really just the ability to use thought leadership to enhance an existing service offering. So often it's developing new methodologies, new ways of working, new ways of thinking. Then the seventh, oops, I double jumped ahead, was service creation, which is the idea of using thought leadership to iterate and create whole new products and services. So finding new ways of working that we didn't see before and turning that into new offerings for the organization. So something that firms need to be really good at. And the eighth is just creating a conducive culture. I want to say having a culture because it's all about creating it. So how do you build a culture that is conducive for thought leadership to thrive? And so if you are performing effectively across all 8 of these dimensions, then we would see you as a high performing organization, AKA the best. Now, the way we did this, so essentially a scale of 1 to 5 on 8 dimensions means the total potential score is 40. And then we took the top quartile, or I took the top quartile of the 233 responding firms, which turned out to be any firm with a total score of 36 or better. So essentially a firm that's self-selected and said, the individual said, hey, we're functioning really pretty much at a 4 or 5 on all these 8 dimensions. Now, the one question that people always ask me is, Jason, you did this as self-selection, and how do you know that people really know that they're good at this? And why don't you use a different metric like growth or lead gen? And we've done that in the past. So Bob and I have done that through the years where we've looked at different dimensions. And what we've found over the years is that there is a correlation between the two. There's a correlation between someone saying, we're good at this, and that being good at that yielding something better. In this case, what we found is that group of high performers, their median growth rate was 19%, and the median growth rate for all other firms was 12%. So essentially, firms that are very effective at thought leadership or see themselves as very effective at thought leadership also tend to be the higher growing firms in the study. Okay, so just real quick, kind of shout out to Bob for all of his work. I mean, it took us a solid decade of collaboration to get to this framework, and I'm pretty proud of it. Okay, so let's talk about what these folks do. Like what goes on in these high performing firms. And we're going to start with mindsets and behaviors. And really, we've talked about this for years. It always starts at the top, and it always starts with the mindset of the leaders in the organization. So this was just one data point I pulled out. 58% of the best firms state that their senior leaders see thought leadership as mission critical. So I asked this question of criticality, and I asked people on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is not at all critical and 5 is mission critical, how does senior management believe thought leadership is viewed? How important is it relative to the firm's success? And 91% of the leaders answered that on a 4 or 5. So 58% said 5. So 58% said it's mission critical. To everybody else, it's a quarter, right? So it all starts at the top. I don't think it's a misleading piece of data here at all, because obviously we had a good chunk of leaders answering this survey. So leaders saying they're speaking on their behalf, right? This is a tricky question when you ask editorial folks, right? Because they may or may not have the vibe of their senior leaders. So that's the first and most important thing. After that, I'm going to break this down into really 4 things. The first is what I call rigor. So this notion that the best firms, they just bring more rigor to the process. And I've got that codified into 3 or 4 different buckets. But the first is, if you've been to our conferences in the past or my webinars in the past, they just set goals. They're just much more likely to set goals. So this is the percentage of firms that said, yes, they have this in place. So 97% of leaders say, yeah, we have goals for the activities. For what we're going to do, 94% say we have goals for the outcomes, right? After that, there's documentation. So there's a much larger percentage of leaders that are saying, hey, we have explicit documented visual standards, explicit documented content standards. We have agreement. So we've got everybody rowing in the same direction. So everyone's saying, yeah, this is important. I've circled some of the places with the biggest spreads, so you can see that's a spread of 19 points. So essentially, 94% of leaders say they set goals for outcomes, and 75% of the rest. Why does this matter? So people ask me this a lot, Jason. Why do you set goals for things that you can't control? And what I've found in my own experience running thought leadership programs is just the act of setting goals, even ones we don't control, increases the likelihood of us meeting them. So even though you can't control what you're really going to get from the effort, the idea that you are setting goals for what you'd like to have happen essentially sort of what wills those realities into existence. So I've found this in every study we've done, that there is a relationship between the best performers and those that have goals. I think some of this is self-explanatory. I mean, agreement on topics to own, I said it before, it just comes down to getting everyone rowing in the same direction. I can't get over how many firms that we see in our time doing this where there's just not agreement on what issues that the firm wants to own at an organizational level or at a practice level. And it just sort of trickles its way down to, so everyone's kind of splintering in different directions, which means that the marketplace, the people you're trying to influence and build a relationship with, just aren't fully internalizing what it is you want them to know. So at the end of the day, the more alignment you get, the more likelihood you're going to get that ship moving as fast as you can. We're coming up on the Olympics. There's a reason that those 7-person boats row in perfect unison. That's how they win, right? All right, they built a culture. So there's a couple things that we've been trying to get underneath this for years, but this idea of what does it mean to have a culture of thought leadership? It's one thing to say our senior leaders, develop a culture, but what do they actually do? And so this year I wanted to really look at what it is that they do differently. And you can see on this dimension where I was asking people how much they agree with a statement. So it's a scale of 1 to 5. And so the percentages you see are anyone who answered 4 or 5. They somewhat agree or they strongly agree with the statement. So you can see widespreads here. Senior leaders speak regularly about it. It's one thing for a leader to say this is mission critical, but for something to be mission critical, they have to do something about it, right? So the first thing they have to do is have to talk about it. They have to say thought leadership is important here, and here's what it looks like, and have that ongoing dialogue with their internal teams about why they invest in thought leadership and what it does. And then they have to put things in place to make it matter, right? And you see, I've identified those things. They're budgeting non-billable time. They're mandating it in job descriptions. They're making it critical to promotion. So they're putting things in place that tell people that this is an important part of my job. I've been given time to do this. And if I want to move up in this organization, this is a path to success, right? So these are all culture building things that say thought leadership matters here. Hence, it's worth my time and energy to invest my own time and resources, or the time and resources of my team, if I'm a practice leader, to do this, because it's going to affect my bonus, it's going to affect my career, it's going to affect all kinds of things. All right, they invest, right? So like, kind of simple. It's like if something matters, then you create resources and time and rewards for people to participate, and you invest in the things they need to do it, right? So they invest in technology, stuff that's going to make the process more effective or more efficient. They invest in people, right? So you can see, that leaders are more likely to have editors who are expert at developing points of view. Now, that's not necessarily saying their staff. I didn't actually ask that question in that way. I asked it such that they have access to those folks, whether they're contractors working with an agency like ours or whether they're staff, doesn't really matter, but they feel that they have someone who's really good at developing someone's point of view, not just, as Bob always liked to say, not just stenography, not just taking notes and spitting out an article based on whatever the subject matter expert wants to say, but forcing their thinking to a better place. And then they're investing in research. So they're saying, hey, look, if we're going to be really good at thought leadership, we have to invest in research, because research is the backbone of a lot of what thought leadership is about in most organizations. So they're just much more likely to make a research investment on an annual basis. All right. I like this one. It's actually really fascinating. One of the things um, and that's actually a bit of a typo. I'll fix it in the final slides. But one of the things that I always want to understand is what people measure. Like, what do they care about? Like, how do they set goals? What are their metrics? And in this particular question set, I asked people, I gave them a list of 7 metrics that they could measure. And I asked them to rank order their top 3 and say, so of these 7, what are your top 3 metrics? What are the metrics that matter the most to you? And then you can see what I'm showing you is the percentage of respondents that said that that was their number 1 metric. So you can see 28% of leaders said content views as their number 1 metric. This actually kind of surprised me. I actually thought it would probably be like revenue or lead gen or something that was like more like a business outcome that didn't feel so like marketing oriented. Um, but the more I thought about it, I realized it actually makes a ton of sense. And what I did is I'm just juxtaposing that key thing. And the reason it makes a ton of sense is if you think about it, it's like content views is sort of a more selfless goal. This idea of, is my content helping people? The only way I know it's helping people is if they're engaged with it. So if I'm going to be really good at thought leadership, then it's my job to try to get in the shoes of my clients and find ways to make what it is I'm trying to tell them really useful and helpful to them. And if I do that, inquiries, project wins, RFPs, revenue all follow. Those are all byproducts of an interested and engaged prospective client. So I've used this phrase a lot through the last few years, and the idea is modern marketing is educating, modern selling is helping. I've used that phrase a lot. And that's really what this comes down to, is that leaders are more likely to focus on metrics that are indicators of, are we successfully educating clients on issues that matter to them? And content views would be one of those. So I found this actually really interesting, and actually kind of it reinforces a lot of the research we've done over the years. When I've asked people the question of what their objective of marketing is, and always comes down to the high performers always have this kind of notion of educating and helping, like something around that. It's very client centric. It's not about us, it's about them. If I'm helping them and advancing their cause, they'll reward me in the things I want to be rewarded with. So okay, so that is mindsets and behaviors. So that's sort of like big picture. What are firms thinking about doing? Where are they putting their time and energy? What are they measuring? What are their goals? We're going to shift gears and go downstream into things that are a little more tactical now and talk about publishing first. I approach this a little differently than I have in the past in a couple ways, and so we'll talk about that. But so what are the firms doing, the best firms doing to get their thinking into the market? Like, how are they publishing? We're living in a time where all I ever hear again and again and again is that, you know, the written word is dead and all anybody wants is video. And there's some truth to that, but not as much truth as we think. So we'll look at some of that here briefly. So all right, so the first thing that we see is that the best firms are more likely to prioritize earned media. So they're going to put more energy and resources, or in this case, I asked them to allocate their media mix. And the number had to add up to 100. You'll see here that the numbers, when they average out, don't actually add up to specifically 100. It's off by a half a point or something. But the idea was to say, well, where are you putting your energy and resources at a high level? And you can see this juxtaposition that the leaders have over-indexed on earned media, while everyone else is sort of over-indexing on owned media, so their own properties, right? And surely there's outliers to this. This did not surprise me in the least. You know, why would that be the case? Bob and I have talked about this a lot through the years. I think there's really at least 3 reasons that earned media is a critical piece of the thought leadership mix. The first is that it increases credibility. So if a high quality publication with high standards says that this thinking is worth publishing, then that says something to the marketplace. When HBR picks up an article, that says something about the quality of the thinking. It's sending an indicator to clients that this is something that's useful, that I should pay attention to. And that can cascade down to other business publications. HBR is not the only option in the world to publish great thinking. You know, there's lots of good industry publications as well that our clients look to place in. So first is credibility. The second is I actually think it forces both rigor and brevity at the same time. So one of the biggest challenges that we see subject matter experts have is getting rigor on their thinking, making sure that their thinking is really sound and grounded in data and grounded in proof, and then figuring out how to get that to be brief enough that someone can get the gist pretty quickly and move on, right? And process it and hopefully do something with it, take some type of meaningful action. And great publications are really good at that. They're really good at forcing you to do both those things simultaneously. So that's a huge benefit of getting placed. And then the third piece is it just extends reach. You're getting your thinking in the places where your clients are already congregating away from you. So they may be congregating on your website a lot, and that's great. A lot of people congregate on our website a lot. That's great. But there's a whole audience out there of people that you're not reaching if that's your main source. Okay. The second question, I went at this a little differently. So we've looked at the publishing mix through these studies for years, trying to figure out, like, is there like a magic mix here? Is there a magic, the most important thing you should do, the most valuable publishing? And we've learned over the years, every time we've done it, it's kind of like giant shruggy. Like, I don't really know. Nothing ever jumps out as really, really fascinatingly different. So when I structured the question this year, I looked at it differently, and I said, I want to ask the question of, okay, here are 14 options. Here's 14 ways you can publish your thinking. Tell me which are most critical to your success. And I said, you can pick as many as you want. It wasn't bound. It was, you can pick 2, you can pick 3, you can pick 5. It doesn't matter to me, but I want you to tell me what's most critical. And this is what came out. So the leaders said, and everyone else largely agreed, right, that research reports and virtual sort of or in-person presentations, our own presentations like this one, are the most critical things to our success. So I chalk this up for, here's my takeaway on this. So the first dimension, like why are presentations so important? Why is it so important for a person to be delivering these insights? So the first thing is thought leadership it's best expressed by people. It's developed by people, right? So when you have people in the room sharing your insights, they're humanizing those insights. So they're making it real and they're giving contextualization to things. It also has a chance to create connections. So it's difficult in a webinar because I can't see you, but you can see me. So it's hard for me to kind of have that connection, but I can have bidirectional dialogue. You can ask me questions and I can interact, and I can help you think about what I'm trying to say, and you can help me think about what I'm trying to say, right? So it's a bidirectional experience that you don't get through other forms of publishing. Now, why research? So we've talked about research ad nauseum over the years as it relates to thought leadership, and it really just comes down to 2 things, I think. The first is, and this is in the 8-point framework, it identifies new ways to solve problems. The only way you're going to get at new point of views, I shouldn't say the only way, the most frequent way you get at new points of view, new ways of solving a problem is by discovering them. They're not invented. It's not like consulting firms kind of sit up on high and sort of like stick their thumb in the air and come up with some random idea. Usually they discover it happening inside of the marketplace already. They codify it and repurpose it and repackage it for others. So the first thing it does, it lets you see things you didn't see before. And the second thing it does is it substantiates your thinking. So when you do research like this, it allows me to bring proof to my contentions. I can say, hey, research is really important. Oh, and I have research to back it up, right? Okay, now, this is the stuff that's at the bottom. So you see I had this in tier 1 publishing formats and tier 2 publishing formats, and I did take some off, for what it's worth. And you can see what I found interesting at the bottom is books are seen as less critical. So it's sort of like at the bottom of the stack. Ebooks, printed books, audio books are just sort of seen kind of across the board right now as maybe the least critical to success of anything. And I kind of thought to myself, well, why is that? And I think that the flippant answer is, oh, the business press is too cluttered. Oh, no one's reading anymore, and that's what everybody keeps saying. But I actually don't think that that's the real reason. I actually think the real reason is that, kind of like I said about metrics, great business books are frequently the byproducts of great research. Some of the best business books, the ones have found most valuable in my life, Built to Last, Good to Great, Challenger Sale. The book is the conduit by which the research is taken to the market. So the research is super critical, the book less so. The book is a manifestation of the research. And the best example I can give that's happening right now is Matt Dixon and Rory Channing's work around the activator business development system. I've spent a lot of time, I've interviewed with them for our podcast. I spent a lot of time with Matt talking about that thinking and how they developed it, all the research underpinning it. And the research is everything. The book is probably not going to hit the marketplace for another 12 months, if at all, right? So eventually there's going to be a book of some kind coming out of that work, but it's not the first thing that they rush to the marketplace. Let's get the research right. The book follows later, right? So my point in saying all that is I get pushback on this through the years. That Jason, I love books. You're wrong. I'm like, well, first off, it's not me saying this. This is the data saying it. So this is what the respondents are saying. I'm not saying books are not relevant. I'm just saying that this is what people are telling us. But I think there's a silver lining here, that it's not like I'm telling you to pause all your book activities. It's more just me saying that maybe the book shouldn't be the first and most important thing. Maybe the research should lead the way. Okay, let's talk about promotion. So it's like, okay, you've got this great thinking, you've done all this great research, you've worked with your subject matter experts, you've invested in the culture, you've invested in the people, you've invested in the technology, you've all done all this stuff, you've published some thinking, now let's take it to the market. What are the best firms doing differently? Again, I took this a little differently. We've done this in the past. We've asked people to tell us what their most effective marketing mechanisms are, and we give them a big long list and all kinds of stuff. And every time it comes back as just kind of shruggy. So this time around, what I decided to do was use a question that we've learned from one of our clients, and it's the additional dollar question. So I basically asked firms, if you had an additional dollar to promote your thought leadership, which one tactic would you choose? And I gave them, I think it looks like 8 different options. I'm showing you the top 4. And asked them to say, it's like, if you had a free dollar, this extra dollar just kind of magically appeared, where would you put it? And what I found interesting was that the leaders are more interested in putting it into search, at least as of right now. It might change in 12 months based on how AI is disrupting and not changing search. But as of the moment, leaders were telling us they would more likely put it into search, whether it's or trying to increase their performance in organic search, which all firms collectively are basically kind of 30%, put that dollar there, or paid search. So why is that? And I'll give my opinion on this. I've been saying this for years. The beauty of search is that it enables you to connect with clients when they're thinking about an issue, regardless of who they are. So if the performance of your thought leadership programs is top of mind right now, regardless of what type of organization you're in or who you are inside the organization, hopefully you're going to find us because we have a lot of good thinking about that, right? And so you're able to connect with clients when the issue that you are designed to solve, your thought leadership is built to solve, is on their mind. So it's sort of like the opposite of social. Social, on the other hand, is great at getting your thinking to the people that you really want to connect with, your ideal client profile, but they may or may not be thinking about that right now. So there's just a little bit more waste, which makes it a little more expensive. If you think about marketing in its essence, its core essence, what is marketing? It's about getting the right message to the right person at the right time. Search gives you the right time, and often it gives you the right person as well, because people that are searching for the things that you have expertise in are likely the right type of buyer. Social gives you the right person, but maybe not the right time. So take that for what it's worth. And the other thing that the best do differently, and this is something that Bob and I actually first discovered in our 2018 study, and this research just reconfirmed it, is that it's active and regular involvement with business development. So the salespeople, the people that are going to walk this thought leadership into your clients' offices and your prospects' offices, it's getting them involved early and often. You see this, they're intimately involved from start to finish. So this is the percent of firms saying this is what our relationship with business development mostly looks like. And so this is always a very stark contrast. Almost half of the best firms say they're intimately involved from start to finish. Another 20% say they train them extensively, right? So you can see that the stack I'm giving you from top to bottom is basically like the most engaged you could have with business development to the least engaged, right? So this just comes back to thought leadership being part and parcel to the culture of the firm, the given success of the firm. If it's just a marketing activity, then you're just going to stick it at the bottom of the list. You're going to publish it, and you're not even going to tell them about it because they don't matter in your minds. And so leaders just look at that differently. So if you're going to make this work, I think there's a couple reasons why. BD has the pulse of the market, right? Like, I mean, they're talking with clients and prospective clients every single day. So they are going to have useful and helpful insight on the thought leadership development process, the topics we should be covering, and what we should be saying about them. And then it's just simple human nature, right? Like if you involve me in something and then you turn around and ask me to advocate for it, I'm going to be more able and willing to do it when I'm intimately involved in it than if you just drop it on my doorstep and ask me to do something with it. So just simple human nature. Okay, we're coming towards the end here. I need a quick sip of water. So who's the best? This time around, I just decided to ask, I just open-ended question, like who's great at thought leadership, and just see what comes back. Just put a word cloud out of it. You can see, obviously, the larger names are the companies that come up the most. To no surprise, the management consulting firms really sort of dominate across the board. So you see Accenture, Deloitte, McKinsey, PwC, BCG, I think Bain's probably in there, kind of in that kind of cluster of the firms that are most respected. But I think it was interesting to see that there were multiple mentions across sectors. Now, obviously, this was a cross-sector study. I think what's interesting is the consulting firms get mentioned across the board by all professional services organizations, and you see architecture engineering firms mentioning other architecture engineering firms, their peers, or financial services companies or software companies mentioning their peers. But anytime you see kind of big and green, I think you can assume that answer came from across industries, although I haven't taken the time to slice this down by industry, though I certainly could. So no real surprises here. All right, closing thoughts, and then we'll do questions and answers. So if you have questions that you've been thinking about, I haven't looked actually, apologize. Feel free to start thinking about them and typing them in now. So let me jump in. So closing thoughts. So like, session recap, kind of big picture. So, if you're going to try to make thought leadership work in your organization, I think the very first thing is you've got to drive it from the top down. So you have to find ways to get your senior leaders excited about thought leadership and make it a priority for the organization if you're going to be successful. The second thing is you have to create reward systems that are going to make it a priority. You have to make it something that your people really truly care about and recognize it is important here. That this is something that matters to this organization. Hence, my participation in it and my success in the organization is going to depend on my ability to be effective. The third thing is, sorry, I got to move something I can't see. Just bringing rigor and structure to everything you do. So if you want to be good at this, you're going to have to put structure around it. It's just like anything. If you want to be a world-class athlete, then you have to build a structure around how you're going to become a world-class athlete. And that comes down to training and practice and coaching and teams and all those types of things, right? So it's no different. Anything, I tell my kids this all the time, anything that's worth doing is probably hard. If it's not hard, it's probably not worth doing. The fourth thing is the best firms over-index on earned media. So they are going to put more emphasis on looking for ways to get their thinking into the best places and recognize all the reasons for doing that. Fifth is they invest in research and they look for ways to use thought leadership to bring experts and clients together. So it's the whole purpose of thought leadership is to create conversations. It's to get a dialogue going. I don't know that there's ever a perfect piece of thought leadership that gives all the answers to every client and just automatically turns into cash. I think it's more about using it as a way to have a better and different conversation with your clients about their interests and their needs, not about yours. And I think that's probably the most important thing. Involve business development early and often. I said this already, but I'll say it again. It's like, the more you can involve the people that are going to carry this message into the marketplace, the more successful you're going to be. In fact, if I had to guess, if there was one thing on this list that might have the most impact, if you're thinking about where to put some time and energy, that might be it. And did I miss one? I thought I had a seventh. I guess not. All right, so 4 ways we can help. One is we can benchmark your firm. So if you said, Jason, I want you to benchmark our firm against your data set, we can do that through a survey across your organization and then kind of collecting all that data and comparing against either the best in the study, your industry peers, or like-sized firms. Strategy, we've honed a research-based approach to developing a very highly effective thought leadership strategy. It's something that Bob and I developed together through the pandemic, as a matter of fact. It combines both qualitative and quantitative research, with both internally and with clients, to build a rigorous topical framework. So a framework of these are the issues that you need to own as an organization, and then to cascade them down inside through your practices. The third is training. We're doing a lot of this now. Just really, one of the things we've seen in most of our client engagements is just it's really hard to get subject matter experts and content developers like working in lockstep together, so rowing together. So we've honed a mix of in-person and virtual training that helps just improve the thought leadership development process, bring more rigor to it, hopefully accelerate it. Sometimes that's the biggest challenge, is getting it to move faster, because sometimes it's a lot slower than firms would like. And then the last, of course, how you probably know us the most is just, if you want to partner with us to develop thought leadership, to work with our writers and editors. We've got 6 or 7 really highly effective writers that have been doing this for 20 plus years. So if you want help on any one of those fronts, just reach out. All right, so let's go to Q&A here. And this is an artifact, by the way, this question answer slide is an artifact of an AI webinar I did in early spring that pulled off the same data set. So if you missed that, I did a whole webinar on AI and the thought leadership development process based on the same set of research. I did not include those answer sets here, but that's on the website if you want to check it out. So with that, I am going to go to questions and answers. And so if you have questions, feel free to type them in. I'll take maybe 2 or 3. So let's see what we got. Mike giving me a hard one right out of the gate. Any baseline or expectations for some of those metrics listed earlier? Content views, new RFP, new leads. What is the success number for those high achievers versus the market overall? I don't actually, I think you're asking me, is there like a metric you should be shooting for? Like, a certain number of content views or a certain number of RFPs or a certain number of leads. I don't have an expectation for that or even a metric to share. In fact, in past research, we've tried to do that. I've tried to ask questions about lead flow, like how much leads a firm is generating or revenue, and then try to normalize it against the size of the firm and look for those types of trends to answer the question of how many leads does a high performer get versus per dollar of revenue versus everybody else. And every attempt to do that has just not really been effective. It's really hard to get at accurate data in these studies. And I think it's largely because we get people and they take the research for us, but they may not have like specific financials handy. So they're going to at best give us a revenue range or an approximation. So it's really hard to get at that and normalize it. So I actually don't have an answer for that. I apologize. So the second question I got, I'm actually going to answer this. This is from my podcast co-host, Jeff, who asked me this question every time I do it. I know I already said it, but I'm going to say it again. He asked me, he said, Jason, last time I shared this research with him, he's like, your self-selection process seems flawed. Why would you let people pick on their own that they're a high performer or not a high performer? And what I said to that is what I've said before. So we've actually, when we've done this study in the past, a couple of things. One is the 8 dimensions sort of like helps you figure out effectiveness, because you're asking a layer deeper than just, are you good at this? Number one. Number 2 is every time we've done this, we've had some other metric to compare against, and that could be revenue growth, it could be lead gen, it could be brand lift, it could be price. We've used price premium in the past. We've used all kinds of like positive dimensions to look at this, and every single time, I'm not going to claim causation, but there's correlation. There's always a correlation between we're good at this and we're getting good business outcomes. So I don't think it's a large leap to say that when you're good at something and when you're not, and you can tell. And so when someone says we're good at this, they're usually probably right, or at least they're directionally right. So that's always worked. And I'll do, so if there's any other questions, feel free to type them in. I'll throw one more out there. Um, you know, this comes up a lot for me, is should we stop working on books? In fact, for those of you who were at our last conference, I took a lot of heat about some of the data we had about kind of like books not being a highly valuable thing. Um, and I'm going to say, no, you do not want to deprioritize an investment in a book. But what I'm going to tell you is that there's a couple reasons you want to be still thinking about this. One is, um, in our experience through some other research we've done, most senior execs are still very avid readers. So the C-suite reads a ton. And most of the time when you're investing in thought leadership, you're looking for ways to get entries into the C-suite. So that's kind of reason number one, and probably the biggest reason that you would still want books to be part of your mix. The second thing I would say is that it forces rigor the same way that a third-party publisher forces rigor. The moment you say this isn't going to be a blog that we can edit anytime we want. This is going to be something that we probably put our own money into, a substantial amount of money, to actually get it into the press and get it published. You're leveling up, the rigor associated with it, which means you're just going to put more energy into getting at really, really powerful insights. And the only other thing I would say about it is just make sure that you prioritize audiobooks. I know that they also were listed kind of low in the cycle, but I think it's very clear that the senior executives I talk to, they are heavy readers. They're also heavy listeners. So they sort of read and listen. Maybe they'll do both at the same time through a tool like Amazon, right? So anyway, don't deprioritize your books just because they end up at the bottom of the list. There's other reasons that books matter. So, all right, last one from Clinton. All right, how many pieces of thought leadership are reasonable on an annual basis for a mid-sized consulting firm? For example, should 2 cross-practice pieces a year for the firm be a simple initial benchmark? Probably depends on the size of what do you mean by mid-sized? I think mid-sized to me is probably in that range of like $10 to $50 million is sort of like where my head's at on a mid-sized firm, and you might drop it down to 5, you might push it up to 100. But I actually think what you suggest is actually really accurate. I mean, heck, a lot of our clients fall in that mid-sized zone, and I would be really happy with any one of them to come out with one piece of extremely high quality thinking a year, meaning an in-depth research report, an in-depth white paper that really goes after a critical client issue at depth, that then we can splinter off into 10, 20, 30 different, other content assets for different purposes, or we can extend down into individual practices. So I think your shot of about 2 cross practice pieces a year is very realistic, and I think it's a really great target. And I always try to remind our clients, like, often it's like less is more, right? Like we don't necessarily need to be a content machine like a consumer brand where we're pumping stuff out every single day, every single week. We have to be producing high quality thinking on a regular basis, and we have to be doing the things necessary to get clients to scratch their head and go, I never thought about it that way, and look at the world a little differently. And if we do those things, then the likelihood of success goes way up. So, all right, we are going to end early, and I want to thank everybody again for your time. I want to thank those of you that were signed up for May 21, and were, obviously when I canceled, many of you were really kind to reach out to me and just make sure I was okay. And at the time I was not. I am doing better now, but thank you so much for all of your kind words. And thank you for your time, and thank you for joining me today. So have a great day, enjoy the rest of your summer, and we'll look forward to seeing you online, hopefully again with a program like this in the fall. And if there's anything we can do for you, certainly reach out anytime. Have a great day.